Yeah, so just beginning to notice kind of some of the different identities, roles that we assume, and we'll kind of, as this group goes on, we'll deepen. And first thing we'll do is we'll sit for about 15 minutes, and we'll kind of explore as we're meditating. The term in kind of the insight tradition, they call it selfing, the way the mind tends to make a self out of things. And so that's just something we'll be looking for in the meditation patterns. And then how, of course, the theme being freedom, how to see the impermanence of some of those patterns and continually release the mind back into this kind of innate capacity for freedom. So finding any way to sit that feels comfortable, upright and relaxed if that's possible for you. Closing the eyes if you'd like, if that feels supportive, or you can just rest your gaze at the floor in front of you. And then taking a few longer, slower, deeper breaths at your own rhythm, whatever it is that you need. And then whenever you're ready, letting go of any control over the breath and just letting the body find a natural rhythm. So the same way the body is resting on the seat, allowing the mind to rest in the body. Just noticing what that feels like for the mind to arrive in the nervous system which permeates the body. Setting intention to release any pressure that may not be needed right now, of just having to be anyone or go anywhere or do anything. And just releasing the mind into this receptive quality of awareness that we call mindfulness. Nothing you have to fabricate or create, but instead attuning the mind to this capacity to know, which is already here. And allowing the mind to rest there, and using the rhythm of the breath to give some steadiness, to give the mind a place to land again and again. As the mind settles into that rhythm of the breath, with each out-breath beginning to soften any unnecessary tension in the body. Maybe that's in the forehead or the eyes, the muscles of the thinking mind, the jaw or the mouth, or the shoulders and the shoulder blades. Seeing what happens when the shoulder blades can release and come together a little bit. Opening up the chest and feeling the weight of the arms and the hands just fall naturally. And inviting in a sense of ease into the emotional body, in the torso, the stomach, the belly, and some softness. Allowing that to extend down through the legs and the feet. Relaxing the upper legs, through the knees and the lower legs, all the way down through the feet. And then as you're ready, just settling into a whole body awareness with the rhythm of the breath as the anchor for the mind, wherever that feels supportive for you. And of course the mind will think. It's what it does. But also noticing the gaps between the thoughts. Noticing that awareness when the mind has a little space, a little breathing room. And as the mind settles, and maybe some space or some degree of calm may begin to arise, noticing the way that this selfing can start to appear in practice. Wanting to have a good meditation, wanting to be calmer, judging the thinking mind. Just knowing that quality of the mind if or when it arises. Maybe the subtle ways the mind can judge ourselves or experience. That was stupid. Why are you doing that? All can be objects of meditation. And also beginning to tune into the quality of change, particularly in the mind and these kind of brief identities that pop up in the mind. Just noticing how they can shift, change. It's the thinking mind itself. It's all a process. And so when the mind is rooted in the steadiness of mindfulness, it's possible to view the arising and passing mind states, identities, from a place of balance and poise, non-judgment. Well, there's the judging mind. There's the anxious mind. Hello. noticing the quality of change. And then inclining the mind towards this possibility for release. Releasing the mind from trying to hold on to anything that's changing. As thoughts or identities arise, pass, when the mind wants to get involved, wants to get pulled in, what does it feel like to release and cool the mind? Not me, not mine, nothing to hold on to. It's just karmic activity. And what this does is starts to weaken the neural pathways of attachment and empower and strengthen the neural pathways of coolness and release. The mind can become familiar with what it feels like to not hold on, to be open, to be spacious. And so what does it feel like as the mind becomes kind of disenchanted with holding on or attaching? What is it like for the heart and the mind to touch into this underlying quality of release, of freedom? What the Buddha called the deathless. All phenomena are impermanent and changing. But the mind can touch a true refuge, which comes from release. So rather than freedom being something far off in a distant future, the invitation is to incline the mind towards that sense of coolness and non-grasping in the here and now. What does it feel like to release the heart and the mind from having to hold any identities at all? Just spending this last minute or two really considering what it would feel like to just completely let go. May any goodness that comes from this practice be for the benefit and the welfare of all living beings. In some small way, may this practice be a drop in the ocean of the great suffering in this world. And may it be in support of freedom for all living beings. May all living beings be free. Thank you for your practice, for being here. All right, so I'll just share some thoughts, and then we'll open it up for further discussion. And I wanted to start by telling a story from the sutta. This is about Anuruddha. Anuruddha was a practitioner at the time of the Buddha who had profound meditative attainments, among which he could see the thousand-fold cosmos. I don't know if anyone's at that level or not yet, but so energy strong, mindfulness steady, body calm, mind's really concentrated, but not fully released. This is kind of like a common theme in the suttas where there's like all these people who are like almost enlightened, not quite there. And Sāriputta, who is one of the Buddha's like one of like two disciples who were like right up there with the Buddha, kind of points out to Anuruddha that the thoughts around these qualities, around the meditative attainments, are still tied to conceit and restlessness and anxiety, that there's some attachment. So he says the problem is not the qualities themselves, the problem is the I that's forming around these. And so this book, The Island, which we've been referencing this whole month, which is all about liberation, comments that Anuruddha is missing the crucial and liberating element, the presence of the unconditioned, which is what we were kind of trying to lean into in that meditation there. So the identification with the meditative achievement or lack of achievement, right, is obscuring his ability to tap into what the Buddha was actually pointing at. Does that make sense? Like these practices are meant to carry the mind right to the far shore, and they can be beautiful along the way, and there can be a way the mind can get trapped in like, wow, this is dope, right? Like this feels really, really good. But that attachment can kind of be a hindrance at a certain point. So that's what I want to explore today. Shedding spiritual materialism, kind of how this shows up in the modern world maybe, and how loosening attachment to spiritual selfing can lead to freedom. So, most of us may not be seeing the thousand-fold cosmos on a regular basis. If you are, awesome. Well done. But there can definitely be patterns, right? I think especially in the wellness world of becoming more mindful. I am becoming more emotionally intelligent. I am a helper. I am the Buddhist. I am a therapist, a yoga teacher, right? These identities, and they're not bad things, of course. But on the flip side of it, also, I'm not good at this. I'm not progressing fast enough. I'm not achieving the things I want to achieve. And so even some of these beautiful identities and things can become identity projects for the mind. It takes something like meditation and turns it into a new form of creating a me around it. So meditation, therapy, activism, healing, service, community leadership can all become material for selfing. And again, these doesn't mean these things are bad. It just means that they're conditioned. Ultimately, I can't take refuge in my role as a therapist at all times. That would be very annoying, I think, for many people, right? It serves a purpose, but it's not ultimately what I can wake up and just be like, yes, let me tap into this identity as a therapist. It serves a purpose, but it's impermanent. So all these roles arise and pass. They're useful, but in Buddhist teachings, not kind of the final refuge. Early on in my own practice, I came into, spiritual community, meeting a lot of spiritual teachers, and I was very intrigued by the whole scene. And this was called Against the Stream back in these days, before Wild Heart. It was called Against the Stream, and there were centers in New York, in LA, and Nashville, where I was living at the time, and a few other cities. And it had a very punk rock kind of counterculture identity to it. And so, coming from someone who played in punk bands, my mind was looking for a new identity, and I was like, this is it. This is who I'm going to be now, right? I want to fall in with these people. Spent time going overseas to Burma, to Thailand, to really this is what people do in the scene. And it was beautiful, honestly. Such a great community for me to fall into at a time when I desperately needed it. It was coming from a near-death experience, from drugs, from alcohol, and I really needed something to lean into that felt supportive and also something cool that I was excited about. And over time, like any community or scene, you start to notice things, practicing overseas in monastic communities. There's very strong kind of patriarchal hierarchies that exist. Spiritual teachers who I respected, sexual assault allegations coming out, right? And even just competitiveness in spiritual scenes of I did a 6-week retreat, I did a 12-week retreat, I did a 3-year retreat, that's a real...
I've never thought
yeah. And so, so many of these teachers would have so many followers and stuff, right? Because they have an image and they're cool. And so I realized there's another trap here, the same thing that I had found in the music scene where the competitiveness and grasping and trying to be the best, that's the exact same thing can happen in spiritual communities. Yeah, so can be supportive. On the other hand, can be rife with grasping, power struggles, and all the other bullshit. And so in early Buddhist teachings, there's like 4 stages of awakening, which is, of course, there's a list of a certain number. Those of you who've been coming for a while know in early Buddhism, there's always a list. And the first one, anyways, is the only I'm going to talk about. It's called stream entry, Sotapanna, it's called. And one way stream entry is described as the mind releasing 3 fetters: identity view, doubt in the practice, and attachment to rites and rituals. So this connects really deeply to the theme I wanted to explore tonight, right? The identity view, the mind just stops attaching to this idea of me and mine, right? That's a deeply liberating thing, to be attached to that identity, to no longer be attached to the identity. Also can be released from some of the doubt in the practice, and also begins to release from the belief that spiritual forms, rituals, practices, teachers, or identities themselves are where the freedom is. So it's like the mind, and it's, the way it's said in this teaching is the mind kind of releases these things as a part of a big insight. It realizes like, oh, the chanting is helpful, the meditation is helpful, even seeing myself as a Buddhist, for me that's helpful, but also can be a hindrance, and releasing the mind from the attachment of the view that those things are essential for liberation, the mind starts to see through that. So it doesn't mean the practice is rejected, it just means that it's understood as a support, not the final refuge. The form can point towards freedom, but ultimately the simile of the raft can take you to the farther shore and then released. So Sāriputta in the story doesn't tell Anuruddha to abandon the practice. He tells him to abandon the conceit, the restlessness, and the anxiety, and to direct his mind to the deathless. This is kind of the ultimate teaching here. He abandons attention to the qualities of conceit, restlessness, and anxiety, directs his mind to the deathless element, then dwelling alone, secluded, heedful, ardent, and resolute, he soon realizes the goal of the holy life for himself. As it says, birth is ended, the holy life fulfilled, the task is done, there is no more coming into any state of being. And so this book, The Island, emphasizes that this is a change in perspective and a different locus in attention. At a certain point, the mind can shift from the practice itself to what the practices are trying to point the mind towards, which is freedom. And it's not scrapping everything that came before, but it kind of points to this dimension of a deep peace. So this is kind of the invitation to use the practice, right? Use the teachings, anything that helps you remember, and to not turn those practices into another attachment to an identity. Honor identity, but don't let it become a trap. So continue to grow, to heal, to love, to serve, and meditate. And keep noticing where the I shows up, where the attachment or to identity shows up in the practice. Or the mind that says, I'm not good enough at this practice, or whatever it is. And I was thinking about it. Many of you have probably heard this metaphor before, but it's the ultimate of pointing at the moon, looking at the finger. Have you heard that before? So the idea being, you're trying to point to someone at the moon, but they're looking at your finger instead of the moon. And so similarly, the teachings, the practices here, they're all trying to point the mind towards this possibility for freedom. And often the practices themselves can be a form of attachment. You can miss what the practices are really trying to incline the mind towards, which is this kind of unconditioned quality of freedom. And in the Buddhist tradition, this potential for a release can be deeply transformative, to say the least. Completely upend level of well-being and freedom that maybe wasn't known before. This is one of the things that was always really inspiring for me about Buddhist practice, that what they call the citta, the heart-mind, can touch into what's called the deathless, what the Buddha called the deathless, this true refuge. So, yes, Buddhism teaches about impermanence and dukkha and all these things that are unsatisfying, all the ways life is difficult, and all in the service of teaching that there's a more reliable refuge, that there is a supreme peace, which is already right here, embedded in the natural world. It's not Buddhist, it's not any particular religion, right? It's embedded in nature and embedded in the heart and mind.